Hello, and welcome to Bloodlines of Vampire the Masquerade, which is not to be confused with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, the video game. What I mean is the Bloodlines available inside Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop game. Now, I have already covered some Bloodlines that are either to do with necromancers or Bloodlines that at some point were considered to be a clan and kind of fell out from favor. I also have a cat that just won't stand still right now and wants really to join us. So here we are. So this is a series where I covered the bloodlines that I found myself to be fairly interested in that I couldn't cover during my clans series nor my necromancer bloodline series because they have very little to do with necromancy. Most of these things are not necessarily very playable inside the tabletop because you would have to have a very specific storyteller to even allow you to play something like this because it would require quite a lot of coordination and it would in this case kind of require everybody to go for the same thing or for you to even have like multiple characters. There is a way to play the more interesting bits of this particular bloodline without playing the bloodline itself because there are books that suggest that this discipline can be moved around, the discipline that belongs to this bloodline in particular, to more common clans. Let's just put it like that. It's not really clans, it's more like the clanless. But I'm getting ahead of myself because today we're gonna be talking about blood brothers. Blood brothers is the way that the bloodline is called, but sometimes they're sisters. It's not necessarily male. There has been at least one example of like a female cohort of blood brothers slash sisters question mark. So blood brothers is an artificial bloodline created by the Sabbat. That's the faction Sabbat. It was anti-tribu, so anti-tribe, the people that go against what their clan goes for. Tremere and Simitsi, mostly Simit's Golden Sorcerers that have managed to devise this, which is an artificially created bloodline of beings that can share and go together as like one body mass, that can share organs between each other, that can share a hive mind. And the way that you would make a blood brother is that you would need to take a set of people, strip them down from their personality, chances are by greatly harming them and breaking them down, get them bonded to each other, fleshcraft them into one and the same being, and kind of magically interconnect them. And then you have, a blood brother. Blood brothers, by default, are not supposed to be able to make new blood brothers. This is because they're meant more as a tool rather than like an actual individual. But there is one exception, which is called the Hungry Sisters. The Hungry Sisters was a Tremere experiment, and it started with like one or two or three. It started this very few. They were effectively trying to create a blood brother, or in this case, a sister, that could make new vampires themselves. They kind of succeeded. When a hungry sister attempts this, those success chances still like very low, something like 10%, I think was listed, and she needs to be constantly exchanging her blood with the person that she's feeding from for 3 to 10 days. But if the ritual succeeds, the person that she's feeding from not only becomes a vampire, but looks completely the same as she by the end of it, and a new blood sister is born. Now, one of the issues is that the Hungry Sisters, not only do they kind of really want to replicate themselves, but also that process starves them and they tend to require to go through an exceptionally high amount of people to stop feeling like they're starving. I think the number that they gave was like 12 beings per sister. So you kind of see how that would become a problem very fast. So originally the Hungry Sisters, they were kept inside a inside containment effectively by the Tremere that was experimenting to see if they can make a blood brother that can self-replicate. All anti-tribute Tremere technically were destroyed at 1999, and that person's haven got raided as well. I'm actually not entirely sure if it was 1999 on the dot because it says that just Tremere anti-tribute has disappeared in late 1990s. But in general, the story goes that all Tremere anti-tribute got destroyed. Like the Tremere, the pyramid fell. The person that took over the control as like one of the top Tremeres right afterwards, there's some like fucky wucky stuff happening with the soul of the original Tremere, the soul of the original Salubri, and one of the compatriots of the original Tremere. But that is to say that when Tremere leadership got destroyed, their structure of power fell. And there were several very strong individuals that managed to use that fall. And it is very unclear whose soul is inhabiting those very specific powerful individuals. And one thing that they have done is do a ritual that instantly destroyed all Tremere on the Sabbat side. So all anti-tribute Tremere are technically like dead as we're going into the V5 timeline. And as we're going into V5 timeline as well, all blood brothers and blood sisters are technically defunct, as in nobody was making any more, and they mostly can't reproduce by themselves. And Zemitzi moved to flesh crafting monstrosities out of ghouls that can also collide into like a giant singular entity. So having a vampire that can do that is entirely unnecessary if you can have a mortal that can do that, with the added benefit of a mortal is less dangerous and easier to dispose of. So that's the decision making that went in there. There should still technically be some Semites that know how to make blood brothers. They're simply not making more blood brothers. Now, originally, blood brothers were meant as a tool of war. So you would take a large amount of individuals, apparently a gang or cartel or a family would work the best because they would already have connections to each other. You would, well, do really awful shit to them until there's very little person or personality left with that. And plus, you kind of want somebody that's semi violent because violence is good in here. And then you would, turn them into vampires, you would fleshcraft them, you would get them connected to each other. And you would get a group of very violent individuals that can move as one, that also don't really have a base personality and that are taught to follow your orders because that is the original purpose of having blood brothers. Now, the interesting thing about the blood brothers is their exact like hive mind mentality, which is why this is quite the interesting concept. Like just having a whole bunch of identical people. And by the way, it is annoying for blood brothers or blood sisters to see a blood brother or sister that isn't following with the trend and not being identical to the rest of blood brothers and sisters. So they will make sure to act and dress exactly the same in order not to provoke each other's anger. So we are talking like identical. And we are talking about a tool of war here. But the interesting thing about like playing a hive mind or like multiple people that act as a singular person is their original discipline that they get. And now here's the thing, there is a little blurb that says that you can use this discipline outside of being a blood brother or blood sister, which is quite interesting. And I would assume that that would be a more feasible way for anyone to like play this in an actual tabletop game, because once again, you're not gonna like convince a whole table to roll a defunct bloodline where all of you have to be attempting to act identical to each other. Also, it would be kind of weird if you're like, I am playing blood brothers or blood sisters, and I am playing like four people at once as like a one thing, especially when you're supposed to be a bit of like a war machine rather than something that really has higher cognitive functions and that is able to have a fully fledged personality. Like these kind of things are not gonna come into a tabletop game in the player's position. This can be used by the storyteller as like a tool for players to fight against, but not really, you know, gonna come in as like the playable thing. Now, for disciplines, the non unique ones that they have, blood brothers and blood sisters, it's fortitude, which is the ability to make your skin tough, and potence, which is the ability to hit supernaturally hard, which makes sense if you're crafting effectively a very aggressive war machine. But there is one ability that's unique to blood brothers and blood sisters outside of like a very specific use case, which I do want to discuss because I do believe that this is a way to bring this into like your own game without actually playing a blood brother or blood sister, which is kind of interesting to think about. So blood brothers and blood sisters get a discipline called Sanguinus, and Sanguinus is kind of like a take on vicissitude that Semites have. Like it has to do with changing body and changing flesh, but in very specific ways. So the powers that Sanguinus gets at level 1, you get Brother's Blood. Spend blood to heal the damage of others in your circle. Your circle are effectively all of the identical blood brothers and blood sisters to you. At level 2, you get Octopod. Send your limbs or organs in circle. So you can remove your eyeballs, you can remove your arms, you can remove your legs. And now I did craft this little picture that I am currently sitting in front. There's like no real pictures for blood brothers, so I took two pictures that are meant to represent blood brothers and I overlaid it over the bloodlines Sabbat Haven that you fight effectively. That thing that like, that Simitz is Andre, which I'm pretty sure he's Andre, which is very fitting in my opinion. And these are like examples of blood brothers that were given. Oftentimes they will look like human skinheads just because they're meant to be like really aggressive people. You're not gonna like find blood brothers that are like into art or into dancing or into theater. It would be kind of weird if you did, and it would kind of suggest that Toreador has entered the circle and was like, "Hey, I propose a new experiment." And you know, you can probably stretch the lore a little bit, but as it stands, that's not what the bloodline was meant for. The thing that I wanted to point is this green one, this green picture, this green overlay, not the white one. I know that there's two of me. That's to create the illusion of blood brothers and blood sisters. So where I'm currently pointing at the more greenish one on the right, This blood brother doesn't have a pair of eyes. This blood brother has two pairs of eyes. That kind of demonstrates how they can move organs around depending on where they're needed. So, like, if you are afraid that a blood brother might get staked, he could send his heart to a different blood brother to then have like two, three, four, five hearts. Now, there was an example of blood brothers inside Beckett's Jihad diary, and it was a singular blood brother called Dr. Verona that was trying to recreate the ritual to make his bloodline, and he kept all of his other blood brothers inside his own body. So he had multiple limbs, multiple faces, multiple heads, all of that nice, good thing, because that is something that you can do with a blood brother. Bodily autonomy, as in having them be entirely separate beings, that is optional. Like, you could pile multiple people inside one person if you so wish. That is an okay configuration for a blood brother. Sounds horrifying, I know, but welcome to Vampire the Masquerade. What can I say? So, moving on. At level 3 of Sanguinus, Blood Brothers exclusive discipline, you get Gestalt. Create a hive mind for purposes of communication, sharing senses, and resisting mental effects. So it's kind of like telepathic communication, but you can also just see from one perspective, just hear from one perspective. And if somebody is trying to dominate you in particular, you can just kind of hop to a different blood brother. Therefore, it is impossible to mind control you because your own senses are not really sensing what's around you, they're sensing what is around a different blood brother. You see how that can get really annoying if you're fighting against this as a war machine, especially if you don't know how many blood brothers there are in a circle. It is not uncommon for them to get tattoos with their number so that they know whether they're blood brother 2 or whether they're blood brother 5. But if you don't know the total number, you could be dealing with any amount of identical vampires that can move their organs around, that can move their consciousness around, that can move where they're looking from around, and that is in communication with themselves at any point that they want. At 4 dots, you get Walk of Cain. Temporarily lower your generation by raising that of others in your circle. So, if you need to get more blood potency, if you need to get more powerful temporarily, you can just now say, okay, we're all generation 12. Well, I'm number 2. I'm going to be generation 11, and you, number 3, are going to be generation 13 for a temporary amount of time. So they can even like move around blood potency, which is it's just very flexible structure we're dealing with as a singular slash multiple entity. And at level 5 of Sanguinus, you get coagulated entity. All members of a circle physical merge into a giant monstrosity. Why be one person in 6 bodies if you can be 6 people's worth of one person? Terrifying. But once again, weird bloodlines were not supposed to be nice, especially ones crafted by Sabat in order to be just like a fighting thing. Now, here is the little interesting blurb as to how you can bring Sanguinus into your own game if your storyteller allows this. This would kind of require you to adapt it from version V20 of the game into version 5 because it's not written for version 5. But here's a quip. It was recently discovered that the discipline can be learned instinctually by caitiff, which is clanless vampires, and what's more, it could even be taught to other vampires as a pair of thin blooded vampires discovered. While a single vampire would not be able to access it, two or more vampires sharing a blood bond could make full use of the various powers, provided they possessed knowledge of the discipline itself. So, if two or more players at your table roll a thin blood or a caitiff, and they talk their storyteller into allowing to take a discipline from V20 into V5, they could have Sanguinus, and they could use Sanguinus without losing their distinct personalities. It would just literally mean that two distinct people with their own strong personality can still establish mental telepathic communication, can still move their viewpoint around effectively, just like using the senses of one rather than the sense of the other. They can still move their organs between one another, and they can still make a monstrosity that moves and acts as one if needed. They can probably also unmerge, but don't quote me on that. So I'm pretty sure that the merging is temporarily, no matter temporary, no matter how gross that might be. So if you wanted to utilize this very niche bloodline, and you can convince your storyteller to allow your cative character to learn it instinctively, because that is one thing that cative characters can do. They can be your Build a Bear, where you exchange clan connections for being able to take some weird, wacky, freaky shit, including this. And you convince at least one other buddy of yours to also play a cative and also take the exact same thing. You can have a lot of fun with this. But I think just taking the whole concept of blood brothers itself and not just the discipline and playing in the game would be a lot harder. Nevertheless, I do appreciate the wacky, freaky shit of Vampire the Masquerade, hence why I appreciate the small and niche bloodlines like Blood Brothers, which were A, very recently created, so they practically don't have any history. B, were only meant for like a singular purpose, which was as a war machine. And C, no longer exist in the newest edition, having been completely extinctified. Like, this is such a small blip of Vampire the Masquerade lore, such a little niche thing. But like, I can't help but kind of love the fact that it exists. And this kind of sets the tone of the kind of bloodlines that I want to cover in this as a series. I want to cover the weird, the niche, the strange, the things that I personally enjoy as a concept because they are such a unique concept, even though it will be rare to impossible to play these things in like a proper campaign. Most of the people that will, like 99% of all players, will hear about such things, but will never be able to play them themselves because it requires such a coordinated, such a specific campaign to play. So if you imagine that Sabbat is already a fairly unusual choice for campaign, because you need all players to be Sabbat, and version 5 kind of wrote them only as the bad guys, so you can't even like select them as a playable, side. Technically, there are people homebrewing them anyway, but like technically. So if Sabbat is already an unusual choice for a faction, imagine choosing a defunct bloodline that's meant just as a war instrument that no longer even exists in the newest edition because they were just such a small lore blimp. On the other hand, I quite imagine a storyteller setting blood brothers or blood sisters up as a boogeyman in any game because once again they would be like such an annoying foe to fight where you have questionable amount of quantity of the same individual pretty much, and they can send their senses to each other so you can't stop them with mental abilities, and they can also send organs to each other so your whole coterie, your whole group that you're playing with, in order to beat them would need to capture all of them. Like, if you captured 3 out of 6 and they sent their hearts off and they sent their ability to see to the other bodies and perhaps even sent more things like their limbs over to help others, you just you empowered the ones that you haven't captured, and you can do very little with the ones that you have captured outside of just like completely cutting their heads off, and even that might be hard and annoying considering that they could possibly like move their whole head as well, considering that the top discipline that they have is the ability to completely merge into one. So it's kind of the thing where you would have to catch them all as if they're some sort of Pokemon. So as an enemy, this is such a brilliant setup. And of course, there shouldn't be a lot of them, and they can't reproduce. And there's very few remaining vampires even know how to make one. Therefore, this can be like a focus of like a singular campaign to sniff out a remaining like circle of blood brothers in a specific town that is causing an issue, which once again it makes such a fun, weird, and annoying setup. Fun, weird, and annoying enemy or an obstacle. And I love these kind of lore bits. I love this kind of choice and this kind of flexibility with all of the things that you can do with the tiny little tidbits of Vampire the Masquerade. So, this is gonna be it for Blood Brothers. Please tell me if you would consider like using them in your story in any way, shape, or form. If you're still kind of confused on what a blood brother is, I'm going to link a wiki page down in the description down below. You can just like click in and read into it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you're going to join me for the rest of the series where I just explored the weird little niche bloodlines that make Vampire the Masquerade such like a great tabletop. So thank you so much for watching. I release these tabletop videos every Friday. Unless like something really urgent or bad happens, then I like exchange a video, or I don't know. If like there was one time when I didn't have access to electricity or internet for a couple of days, but that was like so unusual. So barring like really bizarre occurrences where I really can't reach my computer on a Friday, this is what I upload on Fridays. And thank you so much for my Patreon supporters for allowing me to make videos such as these and videos about video games and sometimes a cult, honestly, because this is tabletops, video games, and the cult is kind of what this channel does, with gaming being the majority and then like tabletop being a lesser amount, and the cult now falling as like the third, with receiving the least amount of videos recently. But just putting all my interests out there just in case you find a really bizarre video on this channel and get confused. So then, thank you for watching. I hope I'm gonna see you in the rest of the series, and toodaloo for now.